Eye for an eye. This one, quickly, dig it up, Eric. Spoken by a tall man dressed in black with short hair, scar above his left eye. Sure thing, Dave. Paul, get your fucking ass over here right now. Eric, the one with the mohawk, spoke. Paul stood next to Eric and helped them dig the grave. All 6 feet to find the coffin. They wiped away the dust and cobweb-covered dust. All 3 of them lifted the coffin from its home and cranked it open with a crowbar and other such tools, prying it open, rummaging through it. They removed the corpse of Miss Jenny Ellie and just launched her onto the rain-soaked grass. They checked her skeleton form and looked in her coffin for anything special. All they found was a wedding ring on her finger. Fuck! This one's empty except for the shitty little ring. Put her back, Dave said. He kicked the coffin back into the restless home and rolled the body inside, closing the lid on her. As part of her foot was still hanging outside, they decided to move on to the next one. This one was called Reverend Peter Edgar. Eric and Dave began digging up his grave while Paul stood in awe, motionless, and just reading over the name over and over again. Reverend. The word bounced through his head. Guys, I think we should leave this one alone. Something doesn't seem right with it, he said. Eric kept digging, and Paul went up to Paul with a disgusted look. Are you a fucking idiot? We're grave robbers. It doesn't matter who or what they were. Get to fucking work or get the fuck out of here, Dave shouted. They all kept digging up the grave and opened it up. The only thing they found was a package. When they were busy searching through it, the gravekeeper's light switched out. Shit! Let's get out of here. Take that and run, Dave said. Eric grabbed the package, and they all fled from the graveyard. The gravekeeper came out and saw what happened. When he noticed Reverend's grave had dug up, he started to chuckle. They took his book, he said as he started cleaning up. The 3 robbers ran back down the alleyways and pathways, ditching their dirty clothes and spades. They stopped for a few moments to check their surroundings. Eric went up to Paul and ripped his bag from his back. He searched through it and took the clean clothes. The 3 of them changed and threw the bags away, ensuring that all their savage items were kept inside their pockets and jackets. Casually walking back into their shed outside Paul's home, they lit up a cigarette, conversing about the haul, they would call it. Dave took out the package and threw the cover in the bin, and they looked at the strange book, the Code of Hammurabi. They entered the shed and put everything onto a table, everything except the book. Dave took a seat and continued reading it, laughing at its idiotic mumbo-jumbo, he would call it. Paul stood up to him, looked at him scared. I think we should return the book. It's just scary. Isn't there any bad luck if you steal someone holy? He said. Dave threw the book into an unlit fireplace and pushed Paul back while Eric was sighing. That's just superstitious mumbo-jumbo, Paul. We've been doing this for years, and we're still kicking, ain't we? You might be new, but don't get pissy about the stuff we do, he said. Paul just nodded and sat back down. Eric poured them a double shot of Jack Tennessee whiskey and started a discussion about the book. So what should we do with it? Sell it to one of them old historical collectors, he said. Paul downed his shot and started coughing up, but raised his thumb in agreement to that idea. Dave downed his and put the glass back down, signaling another one. Eric poured it and downed it at the same time as Dave, whom had finally spoken up. I don't give a shit about the book. It can go burn for all I care. Paul managed to sit back up while Eric chuckled to himself. How about we stab it all the way through? Just completely chop it up. Paul sat back down and asked for another shot, managing down this one, not coughing up his guts. I still think it should go back in the ground, he stated. Dave got up and threw the half-bottle empty whiskey at Paul, but it missed and ended up hitting the fireplace. That book can do fuck all to us. You're being paranoid, so get over it yourself. It can't kill us, he shouted. Eric went to get another bottle as the fire started up. It burnt brighter and even had a toxic smoke was too much for them, so they left the shed in a hurry. The shed lit in flames. Crimson fury shot right through Paul's spine, sending chills all over his body. Eric just watched the shed burn as Dave was laughing at it. Don't worry, Paul, we can get you a new one. We'll go to another graveyard tomorrow, Dave mentioned as they turned around and entered Paul's house. A little piece of paper fluttered by their feet and stuck to Dave's shoe. He picked it up and realized it was a page from the book, one called Eye for an Eye, in italic, bold lettering with monotype cursiva font. Dave was getting pissed off. He took the bottle of Jack Daniels that Eric had and walked over and started pissing in the fire. The fire was raging out of control, spitting at Dave, jumping at him, and Dave continued to mock it. He walked off and down the bottle of whiskey, stumbling to walk as he had the alcohol down him from the bottle. He walked to Paul and laughed in his face. See? Nothing happened, he said, hiccuping partway through. I'm still alive, he said. He stood back and started falling towards the shed slowly. His heart was beating through his chest. As he closed the shed, he couldn't stop himself, and he knew what was going to happen. Just as he was about to fall through, Eric grabbed him, pulled his arm back. Dave thanked him and helped him into the house and put him on the couch. Dave just passed out as Paul put his lit cigarette into the ashtray. Eric went to the kitchen as Paul just sat down and looked at Dave. Paul looked at the flaming shed as it began to die down. Some flickers of flame flew off and landed in random places. Paul left the back and watched all die down. Several minutes later, the shed was gone. The only thing remaining was a tiny bit of paper with 4 simple words. Paul entered and picked up the paper, reading out loud to himself. So it begins again, he said. The paper burnt up, looking into the fire he saw. Strangely enough, the book was perfectly fine. Back in the living room, Dave was still sleeping. The cigarette in the ashtray was slowly burning away. Part of the ash landed inside. Dave let his alcohol-covered hand fall off the couch. Bang his hand made the cigarette fall from the ashtray and was slowly making its way to the end of the table, bit by bit, inch by inch. Dave was still busy snoring as the cig reached the end, almost falling off. Paul ran to the house and saw the cig, and as he ran to pick it up, Dave slowly woke back up, and Paul picked it up by the ash, fell off the floor, and landed on Dave. This little sparkle of flame grew and lit him completely on fire. Eric ran to all the commotion. Dave ran outside to the street, not meaning to head toward the construction site near Paul, and Eric chased him off to try to put him out. But by the time they arrived, Dave had fallen in a ditch in the ground and burnt alive. Eric threw up as to say, and Paul was too awestruck to concede his thoughts. I told you, Eric. I fucking told you something was off about, and you didn't listen to me, he shouted and ran back home. He ran into the shed, got the book from the shed. Upon entering the house, Eric was there, trying to calm Paul down, talk some logical sense into him, but he wasn't listening. Paul launched the book at Eric. It missed him and hit the wall, landing on the table, knocking the glass over, and the book faced up page first, and the bits of alcohol landed on some pages. Alcohol spots with particular words, which read 1 and down. It began to rain as Eric grabbed Paul, the book and grabbed Paul, opening his car from outside Paul's house and pushing him into the passenger seat. Handing him the book, Eric got to the driver's seat and drove off, leaving the door of the house unlocked. Where we go, Eric? Paul asked. Eric just kept driving towards the graveyard. They arrived moments later outside of it and parked the car and both lit up one final cigarette. We're putting the book back. If we get rid of that shit, we might be safe for a bit. Or maybe for good. We should really heed your warning, but we didn't think it would actually happen. It's crazy. Think about it. We score some old-ass book, say shit about it, then Dave died. Is that conspicuous? He said, finishing his little rant with that. That's what I was saying, Eric. But Dave wouldn't listen, he said. Eric got out of the car and stood by the fence of the graveyard. Paul joined him and locked the car from a button. Dave was a stubborn bastard, but he knew what he was doing most of the time, Paul said. They both went to separate ways to see if anyone was around. None of them could see anyone right away. As Paul turned back to the gate, he bumped into the person and fell on the floor. He looked up and saw who it was, but didn't recognize the person. The guy just stood there and looked at Paul. Here to return the book, are you? It's too late for you, you know. You're finished. Your friend is already dead, and your second one will die soon. Just be careful, he said, grinning and slowly walking away. Wait! Just who the hell are you? Paul said. He stood up and walked towards the person. Oh, you don't need to worry about the silly little gravekeeper. Just focus on your friends of yours, he said. Paul turned and began walking off. When he turned to head back to the gravekeeper was gone. Paul was shocked and mind-blown. He decided to run toward the gate. Arriving slowly, he saw Eric climbing over it slowly. Eric, be careful, he shouted. Since the gates were spiked on top, Eric was scared, and sweat from his hand made him slip, slowly falling towards the spike. Paul pushed him over, and he landed on his leg. The crack could be heard from the next town over. It seemed to shimmer through the air as Eric didn't screech in pain. Paul opened the gate and helped Eric up. Stumbling slowly to the grave of Reverend Peter Edgar. Step but slow, painful step, they finally reached it. Paul dropped the book back in the coffin back inside, and pushed in the coffin back inside. While Eric was checking on his wounded leg, they heard the gate slam shut in the background and slowly lock with no escape. Finally put it back where it belonged and reburied the Reverend. Thank God it's all over, Eric said, stumbling to his feet. Paul backed away and helped Eric up. Eric turned to attempt to walk away, and Paul observed the nearby gravestone. He saw one empty coffin and said, "Paul, hurry up, man. We need to leave," Eric said. Paul turned to face him, nodded and walked off and slipped on the watery glass, banging his head against the side of the landing in the coffin. Eric saw and watched in fear as his second best mate fell into this phenomenon. "It's not over yet, Paul! Stay there! I'll get help!" he shouted, slowly walking towards the gate. When he arrived, he tried to open up the gate, but no avail. So he pulled himself up to the fence, but as he climbed over, he landed on his leg and broke it fully, finally falling to the floor, still holding the fence. Eric screamed out, and as the fence broke off, impaled him in many places, instantly killing him. Paul was still unconscious, unknowing, barely breathing. He woke several hours later, banging his head in pain forehead on the lid of the coffin. He tried to push up the lid, but it wouldn't move. "Okay, this isn't funny, Eric. Get me out of here. I think I'm going to be sick," he said, putting all his power into pushing, but nothing worked. Only a little voice can be heard outside, a familiar voice, once which said, "Your second friend died not long after your accident last night." He began to laugh out loud. "I told you it wasn't over. Now it's your turn," he said. The grave caper began walking away, whistling and singing to himself. The last words heard by Paul's ears. The only thing he could hear was a song. "The devil hides in the dead of night, knowing all but never helps you. His little books would give you a fright. His wicked powers will belt you. You try your best to put up a fight. You only know his scold. Close to death, he's in your sight. Here lies your dead mold."